one of Dr. Crusher's best TNG episodes is a breakthrough for women in Star Trek. One of the best episodes of Star Trek, The Next Generation, centered on Dr. Beverly Crusher, Gates McFadden, celebrates strong women in front of and behind the camera. Following the adventures of Captain Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart, and the USS Enterprise D, TNG featured more female main characters than Star Trek, the original series had, but the writers didn't always know what to do with them. As Chief Medical Officer on the Enterprise D, Dr. Crusher not only tended to any wounded officers, but also researched medical treatments for any strange alien illnesses. Dr. Crusher's profound sense of compassion made her one of Star Trek's best doctors, even if she didn't take center stage in as many storylines as her male counterparts. Although several Star Trek, the original series episodes were written by women, including 10 by writer D.C. Fontana, a woman did not direct an episode until TNG Season 3. While TNG Season 3, Episode 6, Booby Trap, was the first Trek episode to be directed by a woman, TNG Season 3, Episode 12, The High Ground, holds the distinction of being the first episode written and directed by women. TNG's The High Ground was Star Trek's first episode written and directed by women, written by Melinda M. Snodgrass and directed by Gabrielle Beaumont. The High Ground spotlights Dr. Beverly Crusher as she is taken hostage by a group of terrorists. In the opening scene of the episode, a bomb goes off in a public plaza on the planet Rusha 4, and Crusher rushes to aid the wounded without hesitation. Although LT Worf, Michael Dorn, and LT Commander Data, Brent Spiner, urge Crusher to return to the Enterprise for her own safety, she insists on remaining to help those who are hurt. As she works, one of the terrorists appears and kidnaps her using an experimental transporter device. There are several elements of The High Ground that point to women being involved in the production process. The terrorist leader, a man named Carol Finn, Richard Cox, develops a fascination with Dr. Crusher, drawing numerous images of her in his sketchbook. The Russian security forces are led by a woman named Alexandra Devos, Carrie Keene, and although she spends much of the episode with Commander William Riker, Jonathan Frakes, he never makes any romantic advances toward her. In other writers' hands, either one of these storylines might have become romantic subplots, but The High Ground thankfully doesn't go that route. Dr. Beverly Crusher shines in Star Trek TNG's The High Ground, and so does the guest star. One of Dr. Crusher's best episodes, The High Ground, shows Beverly at her most empathetic. While she does not support the methods that terrorists use, she can sympathize with their motivations. Despite her situation, Dr. Crusher does her best to help the sick and injured among the terrorists, remaining firm in her beliefs but sympathetic to her fellow humans. Throughout the episode, Beverly displays her intelligence, compassion, and skills as a medical professional. As Captain Picard and Dr. Crusher work to end the terrorist dispute peacefully, Riker and Devos find a way to infiltrate the caverns where the terrorists have been hiding. Throughout the rich and expansive universe of Star Trek, The Next Generation, TNG, the character of Dr. Beverly Crusher has often been overshadowed by her male counterparts. While Jean-Luc Picard commands respect and attention, and characters like Data and Worf receive a wealth of plotlines, Dr. Crusher, played by Gates McFadden, has had to fight for her space, much like many women in science fiction during that era. However, one of her most defining episodes, Remember Me, from Season 4, stands out not only as one of her best moments, but also as a breakthrough for the portrayal of women in Star Trek. Remember Me revolves around an anomaly aboard the USS Enterprise that causes people to disappear, one by one, from Dr. Crusher's life and memory. The episode is a mind-bending mix of science fiction and psychological thriller, with Beverly at the center. As the situation escalates, Crusher finds herself utterly alone, with even the ship's crew shrinking into nothingness. This episode is remarkable in how it treats Beverly not just as a competent medical officer, but as a fully fledged, independent character capable of anchoring the entire narrative. Her intelligence, intuition, and resourcefulness take center stage, demonstrating the potential of strong female leads in science fiction. Up until this point in TNG, Dr. Crusher, like many female characters in 1980s and 1990s television, was often defined by her relationships to others. She was the ship's chief medical officer, yes, but she was also Picard's former love interest and Wesley Crusher's mother. Too often, her professional expertise or personal growth was sidelined in favor of male-driven storylines. Even her background as a Starfleet officer and highly skilled doctor often played second fiddle to her role as a nurturing figure. While other characters like Deanna Troi faced similar treatment, Remember Me marks a turning point in how Star Trek approaches women's roles within its vast narrative. In Remember Me, Crusher is portrayed not as someone who is reacting to other people's stories, but as the protagonist of her own. The anomaly causing the disappearances represents both a literal and metaphorical erasure of her world. But instead of panicking, Dr. Crusher employs logic, calmness, and fierce determination to solve the mystery. The episode pushes her character to rely on her intellect and intuition, both traditionally undervalued traits in the portrayal of women in fiction. As her world collapses, she demonstrates resilience and autonomy, qualities not always attributed to female characters in 1990s TV. Thematically, Remember Me resonates deeply with experiences of women who find themselves gradually sidelined or erased in male-dominated environments. The shrinking universe Crusher experiences mirrors the isolating realities many women encounter in professional and personal spaces. Her situation is exacerbated by the fact that no one believes her, another reflection of how women's concerns or insights are often dismissed. Yet, instead of yielding to fear or despair, Crusher continues to press forward, trusting in her abilities and understanding of the situation. It is her insistence on trusting her perception of reality that ultimately leads to her escape. In broader terms, this episode is a reflection of how Star Trek evolved over time. Gene Roddenberry's original vision of equality and diversity was always present, but the execution often faltered in the early days. While the series featured female characters like Uhura, they were often sidelined or reduced to secondary roles. By the time The Next Generation aired, the dynamics had shifted, but not without occasional setbacks. Even though Dr. Crusher was the chief medical officer of the Federation's flagship, her character frequently played second fiddle to Picard, Riker, or even Data. Remember Me stands out as a breakthrough because it challenges these conventions, not just for Dr. Crusher, but for women in Star Trek in general. Beverly's storyline in this episode is not rooted in romance, family, or support for a male character's journey. It is about her intellect, and her resolve. Furthermore, the episode challenges the notion that women can only be nurturing or emotional in leadership roles. Dr. Crusher is deeply empathetic and compassionate, but it is her analytical mind and problem-solving skills that save her and restore the universe to its proper state. This episode's significance also comes from its time of airing. In the early 1990s, women in science fiction were still fighting for meaningful, independent roles. Shows like The X-Files and Buffy the Vampire Slayer would later solidify the idea of complex female protagonists in genre television. But Star Trek: The Next Generation was already laying the groundwork with episodes like Remember Me. Dr. Crusher, through this storyline, became a representation of women's capability in science, leadership, and problem-solving. She isn't saved by a man, nor does she fall apart when faced with adversity. Instead, she navigates her own path to victory. In conclusion, Remember Me remains one of Dr. Crusher's best episodes, not only because it allows her character to shine, but because it stands as a moment of triumph for women in Star Trek. It shows that female characters can be just as complex, intelligent, and heroic as their male counterparts. In a series that values exploration and discovery, this episode helped pave the way for more dynamic and empowered portrayals of women, both